Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video series. We'll take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, we'll be reviewing the sourcebook and bestiary Shadow and Twilight, a Shadowfell and Feywild supplement designed by Daniel K. for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/Rogue Watson. So this is a mainly bestiary, but also sourcebook for the Shadowfell and the Feywild. Now, I've reviewed a lot of products that have to do with the Feywild. It's a pretty popular topic and location setting for a lot of DM's Guild creators, and one that Wizards hasn't explored too much. I think we got Wild Beyond the Witchlight, and that's been about it for Feywild official content. Shadowfell is a trickier one because we technically haven't gotten really anything beyond that little blurb in the Dungeon Master's Guide about the Shadowfell, and yet technically Barovia and then all of the domains of Dread exist in the Shadowfell as well as kind of their own demi-planes. So we've kind of gotten a lot of the Shadowfell, and yet we also haven't really seen the fuller, bigger, like, fantasy world of the Shadowfell, which is more what this dives into, although it does mention specifically the Dark Powers as kind of the gods of the Shadowfell. And then, of course, you've got the courts and the Fey, queens as the kind of rulers of the Feywild. So the book is over 200 pages, and the bestiary takes up about 2/3, maybe more, of that content. In fact, judging from the word from the author, it started out as a bestiary, and then they eventually just had so much information and detail that they decided to turn it into a source book as well. And I'm glad they did, because I think the source book part of it is very, very good. I don't want to skip over it because I learned a lot of cool information. And for example, I haven't seen Shadowfell stuff mentioned. I think, like I said, since the Dungeon Master's Guide, and since we reviewed the that apocalyptic Forgotten Realms series of adventures that included Evernight replacing Neverwinter and all that fun ideas. So I was really enjoyed reading about all this information. The Festering Forest, the Shadow Marsh, Evernight, which is a dark city ruled by the undead. I really get the feeling that Shadowfell is kind of like the upside down of the Forgotten Realms, and that's definitely how I would run it. Is very creepy and a nightmare version, and everything's kind of twisted and kind of a twisted mirror image of the normal material plane. We also get an improved Shadowfell Despair table. So there is one that exists in the Dungeon Master's Guide. It's like 3 things long. This one is a lot more interesting and better. There's rules for crafting objects out of shadow stuff, which I think is kind of similar to the whole aspect of having shadow spells, which I don't think are in 5th edition, but maybe were in older editions. And what I really enjoy, and this is true of both Shadowfell and Feywild, is the designer gives us some adventure plot hooks as well as encounter tables. So plot hooks are actual adventure ideas. None of these are full on, they're like a paragraph or a couple sentences or something. But I think there are some pretty cool ideas in here. There's I loved the, Shadow Cabinet. That's a noble's child has gone missing, and it turns out there's this creepy Bone Claw, which is kind of a failed lich, ends up corrupting the child and taking them into the Shadowfell, which is a really neat idea. So I like these little adventure plot hooks, and then the encounter tables are also very impressive. As you can tell, they're not just simple, spawn 1d4 shadow wolves or whatever. Instead, it's actual, like, kind of fun scripted ideas. There's one that's like a fangless vampire in hiding that you can kind of surprise, and ends up being kind of a weird twist on the fact that the vampire is usually the one hunting you. One of them is there's just 2 dragon-type creatures hunting each other in the air, attacking a Death Seep Wyvern and a young red shadow dragon, both of which stat blocks, I believe, are in here. There's a lot of just creepy monsters doing creepy stuff. It does a good job of showing off a lot of creatures that are obviously in this book, and is a good excuse to use them. So I think that's a really, really fun encounter table. And then we have these crazy player options, which is, hey, if your players, maybe getting to the Shadowfell is a little tricky, so why not, maybe we'll just let them play as undead characters. Or maybe this is just a good, one of those things where if a character died prematurely and they want to figure out a way to hang on in some special way, then maybe they can turn into an undead. There are other books, I think, was it Playing Dead, that I reviewed years ago, that turn this into a full-on, supplement of its own, but still a very cool idea. And the designer spends pages and pages coming up with all of these specific rules for basically transforming your character into these certain undead, including rules for becoming a lich, which is a very involved, process of transferring your soul into an item, and then becoming different kinds of liches, which is pretty insane. So there's a lot in here. There's different kinds of creatures too, and it says, hey, you want to become, an undead. There's different kinds of ghosts, different kinds of vampires, different kinds of liches. It gets really pretty crazy, and then it goes through all of the dark powers, and all of this that I'm going over is pretty much exactly how the Feywild works in terms of how it's set up. You get the adventure hooks, the encounter tables, the location breakdown. I just personally thought the Shadowfell stuff was way more interesting because I have personally reviewed a lot of Feywild stuff already, so I've kind of learned a lot of this information. Maybe not necessarily like a breakdown of locations necessarily. It's usually adventures that I'm looking at that provide other, surrounding context. But so I appreciate the more generic approach to world buildings. I think that is very important. If you actually are going to create an adventure or a full campaign in an area, you need a lot of those, background pieces and encounter tables and just kind of interesting ideas that DMs can run with. I just thought the Shadowfell has just been more interesting because I think it's a more interesting setting, and I just haven't seen it used beyond like Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and then all the different domains of dreads and stuff, versus just the full-on Shadowfell realm itself. Although having a bunch of bitchy immortal or near immortal elves warring each other in the court system seems like a pretty fun time as well. So we've got what is this? This is a different Wild Magic Surge table, I believe, that just says, hey, Wild Magic Surges be happening constantly in the Feywild. Just don't worry about the whole sorcery point stuff. Some excellent plot hooks and encounter tables for the Feywild. And then the player options are about making your own Fey bargains, which is always a big deal, and clearly where a lot of our fairy tales are brokered out of, from making all those, and then the various court systems from the Feywild. So I really enjoy all of that sourcebook stuff. Obviously, it's only really important if you're going to be running an adventure in those locations, but even if you're only going to be, stepping in and running something in the Domains of Dread or a single adventure in the Feywild, I think it is nice to be able to get some of those background information. However, what is really going to sell this book for you, or what should sell the book for you, is the Bestiary, which is really, really, really damn good. Probably one of the better bestiaries I've seen. Presentation-wise, it's not the best. I think the art is probably the weakest element, and I only say that because bestiaries really benefit from having some amazing art done for them, but that shouldn't necessarily deter you. I believe the designer actually did a lot of the art themselves, and then they used kind of, some stock art and other things to go along with it. It's not enough to make it an official con for me, but just there is some kind of clashing art styles that doesn't look as good as maybe it could have been. But the actual content here, the important part, the stat blocks, are really clever, really interesting. Especially, again, the Shadowfell stuff I found particularly creepy and fun in some very cool ways. And I really like that a lot of these creatures have legendary actions, have layer actions. Some of them have regional effects, and some of them have mythic actions, which is something added from Mythic Odyssey of Theros, where essentially you go through like two different forms. It's a JRPG boss fight bullshit where you think you've got them defeated, and then they rise up to become even more powerful than ever before, and you got to fight them all over again. But now they've got all these new traits and actions. I'm a big fan of that for, used very sparingly for most likely like end of campaign stuff, or at least major huge battles. And I also love that we have a tactics section for every one of these monsters. This is a huge thumbs up for me, because some of these stat blocks can get absolutely insane, and I get excited about running them, and then when I'm sitting there in front of my players, I start freaking out like, oh, what am I actually supposed to be doing? Like, how can I run this stat block? So I really appreciate the designer says, hey, here's what this character should be focusing on. Here's how they can take care of, spellcasters. Here's what they prioritize first in terms of their move set. Here's what they should be doing constantly. Are they the kind of person that runs up and gets in the fight with the melee? Are they somebody that prefers to stay at range and let their minions handle things? Do they take advantage of some high movement abilities or some escapability? Do they have summons that they want to always try to get done? That's really, really, really helpful to have that, and to have that on not just the big bosses but for every single character is just absolutely a huge, huge thumbs up. So I really appreciate that. We've got just tons of interesting, huge creature stat blocks. All of the reigning Fey, court queens and Prince of Frost and all these characters, and then all these creepy, undead shadow creatures, and sometimes literally just undead, like this undead stingray, this black skate. This boneyard I really enjoy. It bites if it kills people. Those people just melt and become part of the boneyard. And then as legendary actions, it can produce skeletons out of itself. So that's just a really cool boss fight waiting to happen. If I can skip around to a few of my interesting creatures. The Frostwind Fury. I love the combination of kind of a siren's ability of luring, having like a charming spell that lures people towards it, and then it can unleash its icy vortex, which is this whirling mass of ice shards in a 30-foot radius. So it lures people towards it, then turns on its giant AoE in order to attack. Skip ahead to 123. The Green Ghost. I love this idea of an undead plant creature that can attack by like kind of possessing or using other beasts or plants around it, which is a really interesting concept. So I like the idea of an undead creature that can utilize the environment in some unique ways, which is pretty interesting. The Mist Dweller. Let's go skip ahead for that one. You can see there's some stock art that's being used here. This one is a really cool idea with the entire environment being this creepy, mist-like effect, and it attacks with these tendrils that can pop out of anywhere within the mist zone, and the players are constantly having to make this wisdom save while being in this area. It's almost like you're fighting the environment itself, but there is still a stat block behind the environment that you can run, and clearly having a tactics section for something like this is very, very helpful. It can literally like awaken creatures, and just kind of turn the entire environment against you. Which is an absolutely awesome idea. I thought the Pallbearer was really cool, which is this creature that it's got a raven skull, it's carrying a lantern in one hand and a scythe in the other, and it's got a coffin strapped to its back. And if anybody looks at the coffin, it's kind of got the rules of like the Umber Hulk, where its ability is always on, but you can choose to avert your eyes. Then the coffin can paralyze you just by staring at it with its creepiness. And then as an action, the coffin spirits can like pull you into the coffin and shut it closed. So all of a sudden you just lose one party member, everybody else starts freaking out while that person's taking like psychic damage, and you're trying to free them and take them out of there. That's just a really, really cool creature idea. So I thought this was just full of really fascinating, cool stat block stuff that made me sit up and go, boy, I haven't seen really interesting, cool ideas like this. Maybe even since like Al'Tuma Beast would be too long ago. I'm sure I've reviewed some good Bestiary since then, but this one, honestly, I was very, very impressed with just the creativity, the originality of a lot of the mechanics, as well as the forms of some of these creatures. I wish that we'd had some cool, more original art that could reflect the coolness of some of these creatures, but honestly, because the book is so long, I think I'm more forgiving about the clashing art styles, whereas I know I've dinged some products on that before. And like I said, it's not like it's bad, but I'm trying to get an example where there's like back to back with each other, kind of like here. But it is just glaring, I guess. It almost feels like multiple artists worked on this, but I don't think that's the case. I think it was primarily the designer, and then various stock art was used to kind of fill it out. And I think if anything begs for having some good art, it's usually a bestiary, and a big bestiary like this, would really beg for it. But honestly, I thought it was just good enough to be fine with, and I loved the stat blocks so much, and the information behind them all. And again, the fact that we get all those extra legendary actions and things that you can employ, and not just for high level creatures either, but sometimes for lower level creatures. I have a good example. Like this is CR5 with optional legendary actions. Like that's really helpful to have, because sometimes you want to have a boss fight when they're level 4 or 5, and you still want to have this like awesome creature. And in order to break the action economy and make it an actual boss, you've got to employ legendary actions. That's really the only thing that the DM has as a main tool for using these stat blocks. I'm a big fan of applying legendary actions to all kinds of CR creatures if you're going to specifically use them as some highlight boss creatures. And then, of course, some very helpful tables for everything. You saw the table at the beginning, which was the creatures by the CR rating. We also get them by various environments, as well as are they from the Shadowfell or the Feywild. A pronunciation guide is always useful for somebody like me who has to say all these words out loud. And obviously during D&D, we're doing that as well. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for Shadow and Twilight. Pro, over 10 interesting plot hooks to draw players into the extraplanar realm. Full-on adventures would be nice, but I will certainly take the plot hooks. Pro, excellent detailed D100 encounter tables for Shadowfell and the Feywild. I really enjoyed having excuses to use these creatures in fun and interesting ways that aren't just, hey, spawn this many creatures and boom, there we go. Instead, it's like, hey, here's a few sentences that tell me why this encounter is maybe just a little bit more interesting, or gives the DM a little bit of tips on how to present these certain kind of creatures, especially because some of them have really creepy, cool ways to present them. Pro, over 80 creatively interesting creatures and stat blocks, many with legendary actions, layer actions, mythic actions, and regional effects. So I, again, can't say enough good things about the way these creatures are used. So I'm going to skip ahead to where it shows the creatures. And just the fact that they've got all those extra different details that really let me use the most of all of these creatures, which brings me to the next pro, which is the tactics section for every single one of these creatures. Again, not just the complicated stat blocks that have all the different, bells and whistles going on for them, but just every single creature is just a helpful tactics section. It's just like, hey, it's the designer saying, here's how we recommend you use this creature. That's hugely helpful, that I wish Wizards had done right from the beginning with the monster manual. Cons, honestly, none. Like, I complained a little bit about the art, but it's just that I would say the art is the weakest part of it, but not to where I think it's a huge detriment to me. Your mileage obviously may vary, but I think because it's such a huge book stuffed with so much content, and there is still a lot of art used throughout, I didn't think it was detrimental for me. But I will just say that I know art plays a very big role in bestiaries, and can maybe turn a lot of people on or off of using certain monster book. So you've seen what this product looks like. You can make your own judgment from there. For me, I would say that the stat blocks make up for maybe the clashing of art styles together. Final verdict, Shadow and Twilight's huge, excellent detailed bestiary of Shadow and Fey creatures is worth the recommendation alone, but it also features helpful locations, lore, adventure hooks, and encounter tables for all of your Shadowfell and Feywild needs. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Shouts to my platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, William, Brandon, Genocider, David, Eclectic Role Player Roll, Christopher, Brian, William, David, Corey, Coat1337, and Kyle. And gold patrons: RPG, Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus, Dead Lizard, Lion, Sam, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Nathan, Fast Like a Tortoise, Scott, Stephanie, Rufus, and Carolyn. Thank you all very much for your support.